So we have some pretty great news here in regards to the iPad. If you are an iPad fan right now and you use any of the modern iPads, it does look like today Apple finally released a brand new version of iPad OS, and this iPad OS brings it up to iPad OS 13.4. You can go ahead and check any of your iPads that do support iPad OS, and you can download it as of today. And I do have some stuff to go over in regards to the brand new iPad OS 13.4. And like I said, this thing's pretty much going to be usable for any modern iPads. You don't even need an iPad Pro, whether it's the current iPad Pro or the previous iPad Pro. Any modern iPad will work for this that does support iPad OS. So go ahead and check your iPad and you should be able to download the brand new version of iPad OS. And we do have some stuff to actually go over when it comes to this brand new version of iPad OS. So let's get right down to business. First of all, there is something very important about this brand new iPad OS version. They didn't add all too much in this, but there is one key difference to this iPad OS update that I really do think is a game changer. First of all, the new iPad OS version is going to be 13.4, so make sure your iPad is updated to iPad OS 13.4. That's the new one that recently just got released, and you can see as of this article, it does say we are going to get full mouse and trackpad support to all iPads that support iPad OS. Again, it's going to be all iPads that support iPad OS. You don't need the iPad Pro in any circumstance. I just really want to make that clear for some of you that may be confused about this. And it's not like we had mouse support before in iOS for the iPads, because we did actually have mouse support in iPad OS when iPad OS was released last year, but this time they are taking it a step further and they're going to be making it much more better off to actually use trackpads or mouses in iPads now, which is actually fantastic because you can see the direction Apple really wants to take the iPad line. Apple really wants to make the iPad line much more closer to a traditional computer by adding full mouse support. I know some of you may think it's a little weird. It is kind of still kind of interesting to see the direction that Apple wants to take the iPad, just because, well, it's not still running a full-blown desktop OS like Mac OS or Windows. It is running a more mobile OS like iOS essentially. But it is going to be interesting to see how this actually functions on iPads as of today. Of course, we've had it before when iPad OS first came out, but now they're making it a little bit more easier to use mouses. They should be more nice to use iPads. Just keep in mind, I think I've seen stuff on the internet about iPad OS and about how there is better mouse support and better trackpad support in iPad OS now, or iOS for iPads, and it's still not the same thing as you would be getting on like a desktop computer. If I was like move my mouse around with a whole bunch of different functions, you still are going to be kind of limited there when it actually comes to the functionality. But just the fact they are making it a little bit more redefined for iPads, they're making it just a little bit better for that functionality. I really do think this will make it a little bit more closer to like a traditional desktop OS in that sense. And I'm actually pretty excited to actually try this out for myself, because I really do think this could be a game changer, and then maybe more people will be interested to like maybe somewhat want to use their iPad is much more of like a laptop replacement. Again, the only downside to that, even if the mouse support is phenomenal or it's much more better than what we had before, you do have to realize time and time again, you still are talking about a mobile OS compared to a desktop OS, which still has limitations, not just with the mouse, but you'll have other limitations in play, like software limitations, of course, when it comes to the actual programs you can run, of course, on a mobile OS versus a desktop OS. But I am very excited to actually try this out. And of course, it does make sense that Apple is actually making the mouse support, or the mouse support or trackpad support a little bit more better in iPad OS, just because you guys know when they finally released the brand new iPad Pro they just released recently, you guys know they did actually release a brand new keyboard called the Magic Keyboard that does have a trackpad inside the Magic Keyboard. So that's probably why, of course, they wanted to make sure that the mouse support on iPad OS would be much more better than what we had before, because practically, even though we had it before when iPad OS came out last year, it was still very clunky. It really wasn't fun to use. It was almost like, what's the point of actually connecting a mouse to an iPad when it doesn't really feel like it fits the whole design of the iPad, because iPads, of course, were devices that are meant to be used with your fat fingers or your fingers in general. So, of course, having a cursor on screen that you actually move around with a mouse just doesn't feel right. It just feels kind of sloppy. It doesn't feel redefined. It feels like it's an afterthought. But here, it's really not an afterthought now. It seems like they're making it much more closer to a regular cursor that you have on a regular computer. Honestly, I don't think it'll still be one of the main ways you use the computer, just because I still think they still have a lot to work on when it comes to this. A lot of people are already testing this out, and it's just okay, I guess, but it's just still a step in the right direction to kind of like replacing a traditional laptop, or at least like a Chromebook or something like that. You'll have things that'll make it much more usable in certain scenarios, and I'm actually pretty happy about that. Of course, right now in iPads, if you actually have an iPad that does support iPad OS, you can download this and you can connect any mouse to the iPad, whether it's Apple's own Magic trackpad, I think that's used with the Mac products, I do believe. And then outside of that, you can connect a Bluetooth mouse to your iPad if you want to connect a Bluetooth mouse to your computer. If you are running the brand new iPad Pro, unfortunately they have not released the Magic Keyboard yet, so you can't buy the keyboard with the trackpad already on it. I think that's coming sometime in May, so you will have to be on the lookout for that if you want it to be more closer to a traditional laptop replacement in that sense. But if you want to mess around with it now and you have like a Magic trackpad or whatever it's called for a Mac, a MacBook, or not a MacBook, but like a Mac, an iMac, or like for instance, if you have like a Bluetooth mouse around, you can use that right now and test this out for yourself, and it's very interesting. And actually, as a user of iPads, I'm actually very interested to try this myself, because I think it would be kind of cool to kind of use like your iPad as more of like a laptop replacement, and tablets, or the iPad in general, is kind of more a more convenient option to actually use compared to a laptop, just because it's more, in most scenarios, it's more thinner, it's more lighter than a traditional laptop. And then outside of it being much more thinner and lighter than a traditional laptop, of course, you do have the benefits of being able to hold it in your hand without a keyboard in place. Basically, you don't have the hinge in place. So if they can kind of make this much more closer to a laptop replacement, it would be cool. You'd have a device that's very thin, that's very light, that's very portable, that you can take off the keyboard and just use it as a standalone device to just read books, to watch movies, to do all this other stuff that you necessarily can't do on your laptop, just because you can't really hold it the same way you can hold this, because of course traditional laptops have a hinge because the keyboard's always attached to it. So that's also very nice. And then outside of all of that they just added into iPad OS, they did add some new stuff, like new Memoji stickers. They added new iCloud Drive support, and there's probably a list of features that they probably didn't go over here, but once you download iPad OS, it'll probably tell you all the brand new features that they added to iPad OS 13.4. But the standout one, of course, is going to be that full mouse and trackpad support now, and it does make sense. Like I said, they know the direction of the iPad. They want to make it more of a traditional computer with a traditional OS, so that's very interesting. And yeah, that's pretty much it for the updates for iPad OS 13.4. But this one is a pretty significant update to iPad OS. It's not just like a bug improvement, or like a patch that fixed security flaws or anything like that. I would say it's a pretty significant update. Whether you use a mouse or a trackpad on your iPad is up to you, but just the fact that they did add it is pretty cool, and I love to see how this actually works when somebody finally actually tests this all the way and see all the little ins and outs. Apparently, when it comes to the mouse pad support or the trackpad support in iPad OS, when it comes to using a cursor in iPad OS, apparently it's still not full-fledged, and a lot of applications, since they're still fairly new and since this is just rolling out, a lot of applications, even the big ones, haven't really taken advantage of a cursor being in iPad OS or being in iOS to begin with. So of course, a lot of these apps that you may use on a regular basis may actually need to be updated with cursor or mouse support. So that's going to be interesting. So even though this is like a brand new thing and you may actually test it in the upcoming days or the upcoming weeks, or even test it right now if you get the chance, just note, of course, apps will have to be updated. So it will take kind of a fairly long time until this thing gets much more fleshed out, just becomes much more better off and things like that. So if you try it today, just keep your expectations in check compared to when you try this like 3 months down the road. Of course, everything may change by then. They may keep adding more support to it. Apps may keep getting updated to work with the functionality with the cursor on screen in iPad OS. Overall, it's just very interesting. And then the last one on my list today is actually about how Apple is actually going to be releasing the App Store in more stores in more countries across the world. That's actually very nice. So more people have access to the App Store. Apparently, the Apple App Store wasn't available in every country in the world, but now it looks like they're making a much more bigger push to really try to bring the Apple App Store to more countries in the world that really never had it to begin with. And that's absolutely fantastic because the App Store does bring a whole bunch of applications at your disposal, and there is a lot of useful stuff you can find in the App Store, and it's just nice that more countries can have access to the App Store. Of course, for them, it is actually very practical, and it does make sense from a business standpoint or a business model to actually push this to many countries as possible. I don't know what the limitations were before and why some countries didn't have the App Store to begin with, but now they're finally making a very big push to bring more of the App Store to more countries that never got to experience the App Store, which is actually very nice. It does say Apple currently offers the App Store in 150 countries out of the 175 nations or something. There's 195 countries in the world, and it looks like they're going to push up to 175 nations. So they're going from 155 countries up to 175 countries out of 195. So you can see not every country in the world is still going to have access to the App Store, but just the fact they are going to 175 compared to 155, you can really see almost every country in the world is going to have this, and most likely all the big countries in the world that you probably are in most likely have access to the Apple App Store on like your iPhone and your iPad. So that's actually a very nice, and yeah, that's nice for so many people who never got to experience the Apple App Store to begin with, and that's very nice. Of course, it's just a much more way for Apple to make money off of their products. It just gives people more opportunity to find applications and things like that. I just want to know why it took Apple so long to actually add these 20 brand new countries to the list, because it does say right here it took them since 2012 to actually add all these countries to the list, which is very interesting. But overall, that's some pretty exciting news for those countries that never had it to begin with. And here is the list of countries that actually never had it to begin with. I'm not going to read them, but I will highlight them right here, or you can pause the video right now if you want to read up on the countries that do have finally access to the App Store from Apple. There it is right there. I did go ahead and highlight them in purple on screen right now. There they are right now, which is actually very interesting. And yeah, I just love it when companies decide to actually expand on their services and things like that, because it is kind of like quality of life. It is nice to have all these services that you may have never had before, and it makes your just life a little bit better in a lot of different ways. So I am pretty happy that Apple did decide to do this. Now there's almost no major countries in the world that don't have access to the App Store. And yeah, that's pretty much going to do it for today's video. Anyway, guys, this is